Hey, welcome back to another video, devs, and I hope you're excited to finish off the series where we build a React Native and Firebase full stack to-do list app from scratch. This is part 4. If you haven't checked out the other 3 parts, I highly recommend you go ahead and check it out, mainly because you're going to be pretty lost, but if you're just watching for fun, then I guess welcome. So without further ado, let's get started. Today we're going to store the actual to-do list in Firebase using Firestore. So let's hop into it. Let's get started right away with Cloud Firestore. So I want you to go ahead and open up the Google console. This should be the main page right here. And go into Cloud Firestore, this big orange panel right here. And then just hit Create Database. And you can start it in test mode for now. Doesn't really matter. We're going to go ahead and change the rules anyway. Just pick the location closest to you right there and hit enable. Okay, our Firestore database is done setting up. If you are new to Firestore, the way Firestore works is rather than like a normal database, Firestore stores everything as a bunch of documents in a collection. So for our database, we're going to have a collection called users. And I'm not going to create anything quite yet. We'll be creating that in the code. But inside the users collection, we're going to have a bunch of documents. And each document is going to be the specific user. And each user document can link itself to another collection of lists. And each list is going to have a document for every single list. And the document of lists is going to have a collection of actual to-do items. But before we go and do any of that, let's set up a few rules with Cloud Firestore to make sure only people with the right access can, well, go ahead and access the data. So close this right here, and we're going to write something called match/users. So this is referring to the users collection / and in squiggly braces here, you're going to type in user ID. So this refers to the document, not a specific document, but any document, and it's going to pull the document name as the user ID. And here we're going to do allow read, update, delete, if request.auth not equal to null. So here we're making sure that the request is authenticated, and request.auth.uid. So the UID of the user that's making the request should be equivalent to the user ID. And underneath, we're also going to add allow create if request.auth not equal null. The reason we're putting create separately is when we're just creating a new user, we won't have a user ID already associated with it. So it makes no sense to check the auth UID and the user ID. So as long as they're authenticated, we allow them to create an ID. And then underneath, we're also going to type in match/users/user ID /list/document equals ***. And this is basically saying for any document, any lists in the document, and any document onwards underneath lists, we're going to allow read, update, delete, create, and we're going to copy this same rule right here over. And we could go ahead and hit publish on that. So now we're pretty much made sure that only an authenticated user can go ahead and use the database. But once we go look at the data, you notice we have no users quite yet. And that's because we haven't created any yet. We do have users stored in authentication. If I open that real quick, we have the user I created last time. But we need to manually make sure every time we create a new user, it also replicates that user under Cloud Firestore. So let's go back to our code, go to login.js, and we're going to modify create account so that it actually creates a user. So to do this, go up and import Firestore from Firebase along with auth, and go to create account. And in the then statement, you're just going to do Firestore dot collection users dot doc user dot uid dot set, and we'll just toss an empty object in there, so it just creates a new user and doesn't populate it with anything else. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then go back to your Firebase console, go to authentication, and delete any users you already have. We're just going to recreate it from scratch. All right. Let's go ahead and create a new account. So hit create new account, give it an email, then I'm going to give it a password. And hit create account. Okay, we're in an account right here. Let's go back to console. Refresh this. So we have a user right here, and if we go to Cloud Firestore, under the users collection, we also have a users right here with the user ID. So great. We're now creating a user in Firestore along with the actual authenticated user itself. And now let's go back to the code and start working on actually storing the list. We're going to start by creating a new folder called services. I like to put all my code that touches the backend in a folder called services. And then within services, we're going to create a few common functions to deal with these collections of data on Firebase. So hit new file and name it collections.js. And here we're going to export the first one called onSnapshot equals ref, callback, and options. And I'll explain all these in one sec. So the ref is going to be the reference to the location of your item in the database. So for the users collection, the ref is just Firestore dot collection users, and then to get the document reference, it's going to be Firestore dot collection users dot doc with the document ID. So it's just a reference to the actual item in the database. So we're going to do ref dot onSnapshot. What onSnapshot does is it creates a listener to any updates on the items in the database. So anytime the item in the database updates, you're going to get a new snapshot of the document that updates. And remember, onSnapshot, we're right here is doing it for a collection ref. We're just doing changes to collections right here. So anytime something in the database updates, we get the snapshot of the entire collection. Then we're going to let items equal snapshot dot docs, so all the docs in this updated collection, dot map, and we're going to map all of this. We're going to get the data using doc.data, and remember, you need a double parentheses, call it like a function over here. We'll do data.id, it's going to equal doc.id, just to make sure we're storing the user ID locally, or the document ID locally, and then we return data. So the items is just going to be an object with all the fields in the doc along with the ID of the actual doc itself. And here we're going to do items equal options, and then here we're just making sure we're getting options passed in. options dot sort, and we also make sure the options has a sort function, and if it does, we'll do items dot sort, and we'll pass in the options dot sort as a sort function. If not, we'll just keep items as is. You're going to see where this is used later. And in the end, we're going to do callback item. So whatever place is calling this onSnapshot method, it's also going to pass in a callback. This onSnapshot is just going to take all this data and pass it into the callback. And whatever is calling this can choose what to do with the data, all inside the actual callback. Next, we're going to create a couple other helper functions. So we're going to do export const add doc. So this is for creating a new doc. Again, we're going to take the reference of the new doc. We're going to take ID, data. So we're separating the ID from the rest of the data. And we'll do const doc equals ID. We'll do ref.doc ID. Now remember, this is still a reference right here. It's just extending the current reference to be a document reference. And if there's no ID passed in, we'll just do ref.doc, and Firestore will create its own unique ID. Then we'll do doc.set data .then, put an arrow function in here, and we'll just log that we created a new item. And then I'm going to copy this over real quick, name this remove doc. All we need to remove is the ref and the ID itself. And we could just do ref.doc ID .delete .then, put another arrow function in there, console.log removed, or let's make this, call it removed item, and we'll show the ID of the item that it removed. Save that. And then I'm going to copy this over again, call this one update doc. Here we're just going to be passing in ID and the data like this. And then we're going to do ref.doc ID. And we're actually going to use the set operation again for the add doc. We're doing set with X amount of data. It's going to be the same thing. .then, toss an arrow function in there, console.log updated item, and we pass in the ID. So you'll notice update doc and add doc is pretty similar. I just like to keep them separated anyway, in case later we'd have to come back and add some extra logic for document updates or some different logic for add documents. I just like keeping all of this a bit more organized. So we have all the helper functions we need ready. We got the onSnapshot to listen for any changes in the database. We have the add document, remove document, and update document. So let's go utilize these in the home page so that whenever we create a new list, it actually creates it in the database and stores it. We're going to start this by importing the items first. So we'll import onSnapshot, add doc, remove doc, and update doc from /services/collections. Oh, and we're also going to need to import useEffect over here. Now scroll all the way down and let's remove all these lists we have right here. We don't really need them anymore. So we'll just start with an empty list, and we'll also create a reference for where these lists are in the Firestore database. We'll do const lists ref is equal to Firestore. Let me make sure. Okay, it auto imported Firestore for me. Firestore dot collection. Why does it keep auto completing to that? Collection. Oh, because Firestore isn't a function. There you go. Users dot doc. And we need to get the specific user doc. And to get that, we're also going to have to import the auth. And we'll do Firestore, or rather auth dot current user dot UID. So that points us to the specific user document. And we'll also do dot collection list. So all the modifications we make are going to be in the list collection. When we refresh, we notice everything disappeared because we got rid of all the items up here. Next, we're going to go ahead and type in use effect. So we're going to use the use effect function to make sure everything looks nice and clean. We're only going to be running this once because we're just calling the on snapshot once in here. And that's going to set up a listener that's running every time. So on snapshot, we're going to pass in the list ref. Let's go take a look at this again. We want a ref, we want a callback function, and any sort options. So we're going to pass in the list ref. And then do an empty callback right here where we get the actual new list. Whoa, what the hell happened here? That was being weird. And then also we're going to pass in a sort function for the options. All right. So we're getting a new list every time the list in Firestore updates. So what are we going to want to do with the new list? Well, we're going to want to set the list to whatever these new lists is. So it's going to be as easy as that. So we're just going to do set list, new list. So that list is going to get all the fields in the list document along with the ID of the list itself. And now we're also going to want to sort the list because in Firestore it's a NoSQL database, so I don't believe the order of the items coming in is guaranteed. And that's why we already have our own index being set. So we're just going to do if a.index is smaller than b.index. We're going to return -1. We're going to do if a.index is larger than b.index. We're going to return 1. Also, we're just going to return 0. Again, the reason we're making our own sort function is because you can't really sort objects in JavaScript. It doesn't really know what to sort it based on. So we're telling it to sort it based on the index property of every single object. So with this use effect, each time the Firestore is updated, it should be updating set list. Now let's go ahead and figure out how to properly add a new item to the list. We're going to do this by first getting rid of set list right here, because as soon as we add an item to the database, it's going to trigger this on snapshot and the set list is being called right here. So we can get rid of this. So all we need to call right here is add doc, list ref, comma, title, color, and index we're going to get. So first right here, we're just going to get the title and color from the item. And we'll get rid of this. And we'll just do const index equal list dot length larger than 1. So we're just checking to make sure there's an item in the list. And if there is already an item in the list, we'll get the last item from the list and get its index and just add 1 to it. Save that. Let me make sure and double check we're not already getting this index anywhere else. Okay, yeah, we're just setting it right here. So save that. Now let's go ahead and try adding a new item to the list. So I'm gonna click add, click the name, fire list, or rather type the name and set the color to orange. Hit save, and we got fire list right here. Now let's go ahead and refresh this. And you'll notice we still have fire list. It hasn't reset or anything. I can also go ahead, log out, and log back in. And we still have the fire list, so we're officially storing it. Let me go ahead and show it to you in the database as well. Let me refresh the page. So within Firestore, you see the user document now has a list collection. And that list collection is storing a color, it's storing an index, and it's storing the title of the list itself. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and figure out how we can remove that list. So we're getting the index already passed in. And another thing we want passed in actually is the ID now, because we're not really doing the removal based on index anymore. So we're just going to do ID right here instead of index. We're going to get rid of this. We're just going to do remove doc list ref. Come on, ID. That's all we need to do. And down here, wherever we're calling remove list, instead of passing the index over here, we actually don't need the index anymore. We'll just get the ID. And instead of the index, we'll pass in the ID. Easy as that. And while we're down here, might as well change update item as well to get the ID. And we'll be getting the index from inside the object now. Because remember, up here we're storing the index inside the object. And for update item from list, we're going to pass in the ID, and also the data is going to be passed in index, comma, dot, 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 new item. I'm going to rename this new item. And we'll update the update function. Look like update doc. We'll also make sure we're taking an ID from here. And then to update the doc, we'll pass in the list ref, ID, the data. Or actually, okay, we're passing the new index along with the item, so we don't need to take the index right there. All right, let me save that and let's test this out. So first, let me go ahead and edit it. We'll just change the color. Just name it grass list now. Save. That's saved. Let's go ahead and refresh it, make sure it's properly saved. Let's check the database. And look, it's updated to grass list and the color's updated as well. Now let's remove it. And as you saw right away, it deleted it in the database. And let's try adding another list. We'll go back to fire list. Spelled it wrong. Let me go ahead and edit that. And you can see all the updates happening live right on the Cloud Firestore console as well. So perfect. We can now create a bunch of lists and edit them and also delete them. Do whatever you want, and it's all going to be saved, and you're going to be able to access it as long as you are authenticated. Next, we're going to have to implement the same feature inside the list, so we're saving the to-do items as well. Start by going to to-do list and first importing everything that we need. So we'll import on snapshot, on doc, or not on doc, it's add doc, remove doc, update doc, from screen/collections. Not screens, services. Just make sure we're importing it properly. Save that. And also get use effect here too. Like that. Sometimes this autocomplete stuff can be just absolutely annoying. Now we're gonna call use effect. Say on snapshot. And let me also make the to-do items ref right here. So to do that, we'll again import Firestore, auth from Firebase. And we're going to set the to-do items ref equal to Firestore dot collection users dot doc auth dot current user dot uid dot list. And we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get the list name over here from the list in the previous screen. Or rather, first we're going to do dot collection list. Let's format that. And then dot doc. Here we're going to have to figure out how to get the list name, and then we'll do another dot collection. We'll call this to-do list. Or I'll call it to-do items. Now, how are we going to get the list from the list ID from the previous doc? Well, we're going to use the root to get it. Go back to your home.js or whatever you named it. And whenever we navigate to the to-do list page, along with the title and color, we're also going to pass in the list ID. And we'll set the list ID equal to the ID we get right up here. Save that. Go back to to-do list, and we'll call this doc root.params.listid. And then for the on snapshot, we'll pass in the list ref, or rather the to-do items ref. No, let me double check what we're passing in again. And we need the callback and the options. Along with the sort function as well. And we're going to sort these a little bit differently. So what we're going to do for this is, if it's checked, so if the to-do item is checked, we're going to push it to the bottom of the list. So if A is checked and B is not checked, we're going to return 1. And if B is checked and A is not checked, we'll return -1. Otherwise, we don't really care about the ordering here, and we'll just return 0. So just all the checked items are pushed to the bottom, and all the unchecked items are kept at the top. And for the on snapshot itself, we'll just set to-do items to be equal to new to-do items. Alright, that shouldn't really change anything because we haven't added the effect to add items yet, but we should have on snapshot working whenever we do end up adding the item. So the code to add the new item is going to be slightly different in the to-do list. Every time we click add new item, we don't want it to instantly add a new item because we need to make sure the user is actually editing the item first, right? Whenever, here, let me go click add right here. Whoops, wrong place. Oh, hold up. I think we got a typo. Instead of, it's not is right here, it's ID. Let me save that. Okay, every time we hit add, we don't want this to instantly add. We want to make sure the user is typing something first and then clicking out of it before it adds the new item. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to distinguish between the new item and all the other items on this list. So go back to the ToDo List.js and do const new item, comma, set new item equals use state. And the new item is just going to be set to undefined or empty for now. We'll comment out everything in the add item to list now. And we'll go down below and we'll type in set new item to. And then we're going to set the new item to text. Is checked is going to be false. We're going to have a new parameter that is set to true. And then we can go up here to where we do the add new item and we can get rid of everything right here. We don't need to take in the item parameter. Okay. I'm going to save that. And another thing we're going to do is all the way in the bottom over here, right before we have the return statement where we're rendering stuff, we're going to do if there is a new item. We're going to do ToDo items is equal to new item, comma, ToDo items. Now remember, we don't want to change the ToDo item state to do this. We're just modifying the ToDo items directly. So there's no re-render triggered. And because if we change the state to do this, the new items is just going to get added infinitely, and we don't want that happening. Keep scrolling down. And here we're going to want to add a on blur. What on blur does is whenever the text input itself loses focus, it's going to trigger the on blur. And we're going to want to be saving the item whenever the text input itself loses focus. So let's make sure this on blur is getting passed on properly. I'm going to open ToDo item and we'll get the on blur here. Or rather, we'll just do ... props and then we'll pass. So it looks like we're already using on blur here to modify the edit mode. So I guess I'll just get we'll do something like this. So if props.onBlur, then we also call the onBlur. Save that. Now that should be getting passed all the way down. And go back to ToDo List, and we're going to update the onBlur to if text.length is larger than 1. So we want to make sure the user isn't wasting our database by just adding a bunch of empty list items. We'll make sure the text length is actually at least 1. And we'll do data equals text, comma, is checked. And if ID, do data.id is equal to ID. Let's make sure we're getting the ID from here. And we're doing if ID because the new item itself isn't going to have an ID. We're only going to have an ID for recurring items. So we're only adding this if the ID actually exists. And also we don't have this is new item anymore. We just have new coming in from here. But we'll just get that as ... params. And we'll get rid of is new item right here. Then we're gonna right here. So if the text length is at least 1, we're gonna do add doc to do items ref, comma, data. And also if params.new, if this is a new item that we're adding, we're gonna set the new item to null because the new item is being added to the database and it should join with the existing items. Now, if their text length isn't at least 1, we could just do this right here. Or rather, we'll do it like this. If it's a new item, we'll set the new item to null. And if it's an existing item, we'll just remove the existing item. And pass the index in there. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and save that. Another quick thing we have to change is go to do item. Yeah, right here. Instead of it's a new item, it's just gonna look for new. Then we'll just pass that in. Or I guess we could just get it as, since new seems to be a keyword, we'll get it as ... params and pass that in. Not params, sorry, props. And if we go to editable text, you get the on blur and the edit mode. Actually, are we... Oh, I see. The on blur is going to have to go through here, which it does, through the props. So we're passing all the props straight to the editable text. And we're updating the on blur. And we're getting the... And instead of directly getting its new item here, we'll switch it to props.new. Let's save that real quick. Made a lot of changes. Let's make sure we're not having any weird errors coming up. And we don't. So we'll go back to the to-do list page. And let's also update the on change text so everything is working properly. So we'll do if params.new here just set new item. Make sure I didn't add any odd imports. It didn't. So if it's a new item, we'll set the new item to text. To the new text is checked as is. And new is going to be params.new. We'll keep it as a new item. We're not saving anything quite yet. And if it's not a new item, we'll do to do items index dot text is going to equal new text, and we'll do set to do items to do items. So everything else stays the same. And we'll go ahead and save that. And then while we're down here, let's also update on delete. And also, we're going to have to update on checked as well, because this logic is going to be just a tiny bit different. So we'll start with on delete first. We'll do params.new. So if the param is new, we'll just set the new item to null. If it's not, we'll do remove to do item. We'll pass in the index. And then right underneath that, if we have an ID passed in, we'll also remove doc. Pass in the to do items ref, and right here we're actually going to be, this modifies the actual Firestore database itself. So that's the on delete, and now let's change the on check. So we'll get rid of all that right there, and we'll just type in data equals text, and is checked. It's going to be update to not is checked. And we're not really going to be doing anything if they're checking an item that's still in edit mode. Excuse me. So we're not going to be doing anything if the item itself is in edit mode or if it's a new item. We don't really care if it's checked or not. We only care if we're checking an item that's not really being edited. So we're not going to check if it's new or anything right here. And then we're just going to data.id is equal to ID. And we'll add doc. To do items ref, comma data. Okay, we updated all the logic down here. We're just going to go up, make sure all the logic up here is just as good. We can just go ahead and remove the update item right here because we're not really using that. And, let me rename these, remove it. It's all called remove item from list. Make sure I'm not using the wrong name anywhere else. Okay. I am not, so we can get rid of the comments right here. So we're adding items to list. We're removing items from list. And on checked, we do an add doc, and on blur, we do add doc. Right here, we're using add doc for both the update and the set, just so we don't have to add any extra logic to do two different functions. So for adding and updating, depending on whether we pass in the ID or not, it's going to function as either an add new item or update item. So let's go figure out if all this is working properly. So click add. Oh, it says ToDo items is read only. That's an issue right here. Let's just change this from const to let. That issue should be fixed. Okay, there's an issue on line 75. Oh, my bad. I'm spreading the ref here rather than ToDo items itself. Okay. And here we're getting on blur is not defined because right here we got to do, instead of just calling on blur, we got to call props.onBlur. Let's save that. Okay, we added a couple items. Go back, go in, and everything's saved. Let's go take a look at the Firestore itself. So we have the to-do items, and we have is checked, and we have text to support whether it's checked or not. Sweet. Everything's being saved. Now there is still one other tiny issue. You notice when we click add, it doesn't automatically focus in. It asks for an extra click. So we don't want that happening. The new item isn't being focused in, so let's go figure out why that is. Okay, I think I figured out the issue with that. So we're getting the params right here, which holds the new keyword, but we don't actually seem to be sending that anywhere. So let's just do this, params. And that should be fixing our issues. Let's go back, let's hit add, and there you go. We autofocus when we add. And everything's saved. And if we check it, you notice whatever we check goes to the bottom. And we can remove items. We can add a bunch of new items. And remove a bunch of items. Sweet, everything works. So now let's go take a look at the document. You notice there's no to-do items. Now let's go ahead and add one. New item. And we got the new item right here. Let's try updating it. And there you go, directly you saw it update from new item to items. So that's the entire to-do list completed from scratch. Good job on building your first React Native app, or if it's not your first, great job anyway. So we went through, did all the front end, made sure we got all this pretty stuff working with all these colors and a settings page and everything. And we gave it all functionality using Firestore and authentication. So we have a full app that we can go from login, or we can create a new account. We take it all the way to having a new list, adding one, let's name it hello, editing an existing list, giving it a different color, and then adding new items in that list. Awesome, we've completed the full app. We got the to-do list working on the front end. We got the to-do list working on the back end. So congrats everyone, we did it. We made it through this journey together. And if you have a working app now, if you know how to use React Native and Firebase, go ahead and hit that like button down below and subscribe to your boy for more videos. And if you'd be interested in other video concepts like how to deploy this app, how to reduce the file size or anything like that, go ahead and leave your ideas down in the description below. I do read them and put them in the backlog for future videos. And it's honestly super helpful to come up with new ideas. And with all that said, I will see you guys on a future video. Take it easy.